All right. So this is the final video for friendships and romance before we move on to the next part of relationships, which is family and the workplace. So we just talked about the different styles of love. Let's talk about different relationship strategies and things that we do in relationships to build them, to figure out what's important to us, to make sure that we are establishing good, solid relationships in our lives. So the first one is that we observe the actions that are happening in a relationship and we actually act on cues that prompt us to, a reactionary cues in a way to help us decide if relationships are evolving, are becoming more intimate, this level of self-disclosure is getting stronger, those types of things. So a lot of observation and a lot of acting on cues, responsive cues, things that we do, or we ask people things, we get answers, we do certain things, we get actions back to us, which send messages on how relationships are developing. The second one is conversation, is absolutely important. And the key here is the conversation starter. So the things that we do that kind of introduce things in relationships. Simple greetings are really essential. Simple, how are you doing? How are you feeling? What's going on? Follow up on something that you know about. Those types of things absolutely help start relationships and start conversations that lead to relationships. The third one is follow initiation norms. And those are things like the way in which we introduce ourselves, the way in which we ask introductory questions, the way in which we, culturally, ask somebody out on a date, ask somebody to a movie, ask somebody, to an event that helps us get to know each other a little bit more. Ask to spend time together. Ask to go somewhere that might be a favorite place of that person. So those types of norms that, based on our culture, our influence is how we get relationships going. Then the fourth one, the final one, is ask questions. And that is just simply so that you can change the breadth and depth of information that you know about somebody. So the more we learn and know about somebody, the more we can develop those relationships that get to the self-disclosure core, which makes them the strongest relationships that we have. So relationship strategies at the beginning, to begin relationships, we've got obviously communication and attraction are really important. Obviously, we wouldn't be talking about this in such great detail if communication wasn't essential in interpersonal relationships. And we talked about attraction last week. So think about all the levels of attraction and why they're important in relationship strategies. We like to self-disclose to people that we want to get to know more about. And we do that getting to know them better by telling them something kind of to our core, something that's close to us, and then hoping that they would then self-disclose to us and get to know each other better. We also gather information at the beginning of relationships. We start to like somebody, we want to know more about them. We start asking people what they're like. We start figuring out who their friends are and what they like to do, and things that they do on the weekends, and think they're what you know about them, their attitudes, values, and beliefs. So you start to gather information on them. You also listen and respond to different things in a relationship. So you start to pay attention to things that people say. You start to respond to things that you think are important to you, important to the relationship. In a way, we also kind of socially decenter, meaning that we start to focus on this relationship. So we start, in a way, kind of pulling away to create this center within that relationship. So we do this initially when you're trying to get to know somebody, because you have to start dividing up your time and figuring out how you want to spend more time with this person that you want to get to know better. And every time you leave them, you want to spend more time with them. Those are the types of things that kind of cause us to socially decenter. That would then continue to swing the other way once relationships are established and your core group starts to open up again, and those people start becoming part of your group or your circle. But initially, you want things to be about the two of you, so you start to socially decenter in a way. And the last one is be other oriented. And this is a term, as I told you at the beginning of the semester, you will hear throughout each week. And that is trying to figure out what the other person's all about, trying to understand where they're coming from, trying to empathize with them, trying to expand what you know about somebody so that you can learn more and thus, have a greater depth of knowledge when it comes to that person and their life and their lived experiences and their influences. To escalate a relationship, right? So we just talked about to begin a relationship, but to can then kind of light the fire underneath a relationship and get it moving. We do a couple more things. We then start to express emotion. We start showing people what makes us happy, what makes us sad, what makes us angry, what brings us joy, what causes us to have empathy or sympathy for somebody. The second one is that we provide support for that person. So something that's important to them becomes important to us. Something that is important to you should become important to the other person. So you start to provide support in those ways. And providing support comes in a couple different ways. You show up for things, you make the phone call, you ask the questions, the follow-up questions when it comes to things that are important to somebody. All of those things show support. Number 3, and you can see this kind of strings through from the beginning of a relationship to escalating a relationship, the communication gets stronger. There's still a very solid communication basis that kind of just continues to grow. We use relationship talk, which is this idea that your relationship starts to have certain key characteristics that we use in relationships, like when we celebrate our anniversary, when we go here together, when we meet the parents, and there's a whole bunch of different things that go into relationship talk. But basically, it's things that you say and do that are specific to having a romantic relationship. You start using those terms and those phrases, those keywords and phrases in a relationship that you wouldn't normally use in your everyday life except for this romantic relationship. You start to develop a tolerance level for things that if you maybe happen to somebody that you were a stranger with or somebody that you didn't even know that well, an acquaintance, something that you wouldn't tolerate. A lot of times when you have romantic relationships and the reward of the relationship is greater than the cost of the momentary frustration that you have, you become more tolerant of that person. And you manage conflict. You start when there's conflict, which is natural. It's going to happen in any type of relationship. When those types of things start, rather than just saying, oh, that's it, I'm done, in romantic relationships that you value, you manage that conflict. You figure out what's going on. You figure out what the misunderstanding is. You become other oriented so you can figure out where the other person is coming from, and then you manage that conflict to move forward. You set expectations. You build upon expectations. Think back to last week when we talked about how you have expectations for somebody that either are implicit or explicit. Sometimes those implicit ones that aren't vocalized initially can cause conflict, but then you talk about it, you express with your words and with your nonverbal communication why it's important to you. Now it becomes explicit, it's been said, and you manage it and you move on. So that is the end of the third video talking about friendships and romantic relationships. We are going to move on to a new video where we're going to introduce family and the workplace.